Hello everyone and welcome to the game between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. This is a game from the Armageddon section. Their classical game ended in a draw. Sorry about that, had to fix the interface a little bit. And it was, well, an incredible game. And in the classical section, it was even Fabiano who was pushing for the win. I don't know if you guys saw the game, but this is the position from the classical section. And here Magnus played pawn to g5, which loses the game, but there's only one move. Like, this is the only instance in the classical section where Fabiano could take the win if he finds the correct idea. So for those of you who haven't seen the game, even pause the video, try to solve this game for Fabi. Knight to d5 is what Fabi played, and it doesn't work as he gives Magnus a tempo. It doesn't really matter if you pick up the pawn, the bishop is coming to c6, and in the end they just ended up trading. For example, king to e6 was played, knight to f6, and then bishop to c8 was played as the bishop is also attacked. Then knight to g8 goes after the pawn, then captures, and now it's a pretty easy draw. But after this pawn to g5 move, the only move that wins the game is king to e3, and then you come to d4, and then you will obtain a winning position. So it is, a slight difference, but it could have made a big difference, especially in the final standings that we will discuss after the game. But okay, that was the only instance where Fabi could have taken the win, and now we go into Armageddon. And we all know what happens in Armageddon. White has to win, black gets less time, black has 7 minutes, white has 10 minutes, and black is happy with a draw, as a draw means a victory in the game. And also in the match. So yeah, let's check it out. Fabi opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5 by Magnus, knight f3, knight to c6, and now Fabi deviates from the classical section where he went for the Ruy Lopez. Here he goes for the Italian game. Bishop to c4. We have knight to f6 and pawn to d3. So a pretty standard, the modern bishop's opening against the two knights. Bishop to c5 by Magnus and pawn to c3. We have d6, bishop to g5, pawn to h6, bishop to h4, and pawn to a6. So these are all very standard Giuoco Piano moves that we've seen hundreds of times. a4, bishop to a7, knight b to d2. Again, nothing new being played here. Queen to e7 and pawn to b4. Again, hundreds and hundreds of games in the database. There is nothing new being played here. Interestingly, since it's Fabi versus Magnus here, there is a very nice game where Fabi with white defeated none other than Anand in this position. From this position after playing pawn to b4, and there is also a game where Alireza played pawn to b4 against Magnus, and Magnus defeated him with black. So taking down such incredible players, we can say that both Fabi and Magnus know this position very well. And interestingly, in the game Fabi versus Anand played pawn to g5, which is the top move recommended by the engine, but obviously also the most analyzed one. And against Alireza, Magnus played bishop to e6 in this position. But here Magnus goes knight to d8. It's the second best move recommended by the engine, but it's one that has never been played, and it is now, as of move 10, that we have a completely new game. So okay, deviating from the known lines, transferring the knight. Now the knight can come to e6. You also have some support. You can play c6, d5, you can play b5. So, like I said, never been played. Let's see what Fabi figures. We have castles kingside, knight to e6, and now pawn to d4. Immediately striking in the center, we have knight to f4 and rook to e1. We have bishop to g4, pinning the knight, knight to f1. Again, all very standard moves. Magnus says, okay, I can also move the knight back, knight to g6, attacks the bishop, bishop g3, and bishop captures on f3. It's a free pawn, so why wouldn't Magnus capture it? Queen captures with e captures on d4, c captures, and the bishop captures on d4. So what has Fabi gained by losing a pawn in the center? Well, not much, obviously. Rook 8 to d1. Attacking the bishop, we have knight to e5. This is the key idea, and now once the queen moves, Fabi moves the queen to b3 to put pressure on f7. we have bishop back to a7. And it seems that Magnus just is up a pawn. There's no other way to put it. Fabi does have rooks nicely placed centrally on the D and D file, the bishop and queen battery attacking that f7 pawn. So it is not without compensation. But the problem is also you can't just play bishop to e2, which is a pretty standard reply when the knight on e5 attacks the bishop, as now the e4 pawn would hang. So that's why after bishop to a7, we have knight to e3, and just bishop captures on e3. Again, a very, very Magnus-esque-like move, because you'd think, why would anyone give up this bishop? Well, why would anyone allow the knight on f5 or on d5? I mean, you don't want that either. So bishop captures on e3, rook captures on e3, and now Magnus only needs a draw to win this game, and he's not doing that bad on time. He's even catching up, as he started with a 3-minute deficit. There's no reason not to play something like captures, and castles. And now, okay, you, Fabi, win this with white. You're down a pawn. I mean, it's not the easiest of positions to play. But I think Magnus really liked his position, and that's why he went for knight to h5. And Fabi believes Magnus. He just plays bishop back to e2, and he invites knight captures on g3. So sort of a mini Magnus effect situation here, where Fabi definitely could have played bishop captures on e5. The problem is you can't really capture with the queen that hangs the f7 pawn, and if you capture with the d pawn, then rook e d3, and there's not all that much you can do against rook to d7. I mean, if you're planning to castle, if you plan on keeping the king in the center of the board, then sure. There's nothing better than castles and a rook to d7, and okay, then black maybe tries to play this. The problem with a move like knight to f6, and probably Fabi thought, okay, if Magnus just brings the knight back, then okay, there's nothing there, but it's actually winning by force. Bishop captures on f7. Look at this. And now after queen captures, sorry. Apologies, the mailman again. And after queen captures on f7, there's rook to d8 with check. And now after rook captures on d8, rook captures on d8 with check, king to e7, or you can capture and then lose your queen. You're just going to play king to e7, and now, of course, queen captures on f7. The only way to win, but it is more than enough. Captures and captures on h8. And yeah, you have a rook versus a knight, obviously completely winning. So I would say, not maybe the Magnus effect to its full extent, but a mini version of the Magnus effect. And yeah, like I said, you could also play all of that and then castle kingside, allow rook to d7, and then maybe you can play that, sure. But it doesn't look nice. Okay, Fabi allowed it, bishop to e2, we have knight captures on g3, h captures, and now castles kingside, and Fabi strikes with pawn to f4. We have knight to d7, bishop to f3, and pawn to a5. We have pawn to b5 and knight to c5, attacking the queen and queen c2. For the moment, keeping an eye on both the a4 and e4. We have rook a to d8 by Magnus, and now rook d to e1. Pawn to c6, preparing maybe some future pawn to d5. We have b captures, and rook to c1. We have queen to a7. You want to get the queen off of that e-file, but also at some point, maybe if you're looking to get that d5 in, the queen is defending the knight, but also if the knight moves, there's a king on g1, so the queen on a7 definitely belongs on this diagonal. We have king to h2, and now knight captures on a4. So what's the idea? The idea is, of course, if you capture, then the queen will gobble up the rook on e3. So rook to a3, Fabi says, I don't need that. I'm just gonna, double up or triple up on the a-file, pick up the a5 pawn, and okay, then we play. We have knight back to c5 and queen back to f2. Rook to d7, and I think this is the a most devious move by Magnus, because it's sort of saying, okay, I'm preparing, rook to d8 or rook to c8 or rook to b8. Maybe even rook to a8 to set up some sort of a defense towards the a5 pawn. But the real idea is it defends the queen on a7. And I think this confused Fabi a little bit. Fabi has to play either e5 or queen to a2 immediately. But he played bishop to g4. and now he falls victim to a very simple tactic that you miss due to the rook being on d7. And also you don't think about it, you think about the rook being attacked. So Magnus just played knight captures on e4. I could ask you to pause the video, but I'm pretty sure you figured it out by now. And now the queen is attacked, and also you can trade, but then if you trade, for example, captures and the rook captures on a7, and you play rook captures on c6, okay, rook to d8, and now you have the passed d pawn and the passed a pawn, and well, objectively, you know, with Magnus playing this, this is going to be a win. So after knight captures on e4, we have queen to a2, the move Fabi should have played on the previous move, and now rook to c7. Rook captures on a5, attacks the queen, but the queen now also moves with tempo. Queen to e3 puts pressure on g3. So okay, you have to defend it, queen to a3, and you think, okay, there's all of this pressure, we're just going to play something like queen to f2, keep the tension, but no, Magnus trades queens, and he says, I have two connected passed pawns. I mean, what do I need queens on the board? We have rook captures on a3 and pawn to d5. Immediately continues pushing, bishop to f3 and pawn to f5. Magnus feeling very good. He has two connected passed pawns and he has two extra pawns. It's 5 versus 3. Rook to a6. Fabi tries to go after the c6 pawn and the rook to f6. Magnus nicely defends. Rook to a8 with check, king to h7 and the rook to d8. And here Magnus rushed it a little bit. He should prepare the advance of the pawns, but he's okay, I'm up 2 pawns, you know, what do I need to prepare? He played rook to d6, and now Fabi just wins the pawn back. So first Fabi blundered a pawn, and now Magnus blunders a pawn. Just bishop captures on d5, and you cannot capture. But okay, pawn to c5. Magnus starts advancing the passed pawn, and it's still probably playable. You know, it's not going to be easy, but maybe you can hold it. Maybe some bishop e6, king to g1. But Fabi played bishop to b3, and he just gives Magnus another free tempo. And that, okay, that is now too much. Magnus takes it, pawn to c4 with tempo, and the bishop to c2. Probably, maybe, you know, he thought, okay, we're just gonna, you know, get our king into the game, because you can't really capture the rook on c7 is undefended, but not really. If you allow it, pawn to b2, and now b7 is covered, and also c1 is covered, so the rook cannot stop the advancement of the, or rather the queening of the pawn. So after pawn to c4, bishop to c2 was played, and now pawn to g6 again. The position is objectively winning. Rook to d1, knight to e4. You can't trade. If you trade, again, Magnus will have 2 passed pawns. So, I mean, even if you go after one, you're just not in time to stop the other one. So after knight e4, rook to d4, and now pawn to h5. There is nothing to worry about here. There are no weaknesses in Magnus's position. King h3 and pawn to c3. Now the pawn defending the knight defending the pawn. King to h4. And now king to h6. We have rook to d3, rook to a7, trying to get the king all the way to a1 and then to h1. So rook to d1, Fabi stops it, and rook to a2. So now the problem is, maybe, you know, maybe Fabi can even somehow draw this game, but he needs to win. If he draws, it's a win for Magnus in Armageddon. We have rook to c1, and now knight to f2. We have bishop to b3, attacking the rook, and rook to b2. And now to understand Fabi's next move, we first have to, you know, search for the alternative. And also he's down to 36 seconds on the clock. Now, of course, you don't want to capture on c3 and allow Magnus rook b1, rook h1. Of course, you don't want to do that. But the alternative is you block again, let's say bishop to c2, and now all of a sudden rook b4. And how do you stop g5 checkmate? The knight preventing the king from moving. Also, the king cannot go here. And the f4 pawn is pinned. So g5 will be checkmate. And if you try something like bishop to b1, g5 is checkmate. And if you go pawn to g4, it doesn't really matter. You will also gobble up that one pawn. Yes, you will get the g3 square for the king. But, you know, now you're down another pawn, and it's just going to be longer suffering. So rook b2, that's why Fabi played rook captures on c3, and Magnus went rook to b1. We have pawn to g4, Fabi frees up the g3 square for the king, but Magnus says, oh, I invite you to come to g1. He plays rook to h1 check, and he was in this position on move 56 that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You have to go to g3, or you could block with rook to h3, but I mean, we're not going to analyze that. And after king to g3, knight to e4 check, picks up the rook on c3, and that's it. You will also lose a pawn before you lose the rook. H captures, king e3, knight captures. Now you're up a full rook, you're up a pawn, and of course there's no point in playing that. So yeah, very nicely played by both of them, and Fabi played really well. Like I said, he was the one pushing in classical. There was this one that one instance where we checked out the position king e3, where Fabi was even winning, but it was a draw, and then Magnus just outplayed him very hard. Even though there were mistakes on both sides, blundering that pawn back to back. But yeah, what are you gonna do? It's Armageddon. So yeah, Magnus wins. In the other games, also were very nice. Arjun defeated Hikaru Nakamura. It was a pretty crazy game. Again, Hikaru was winning for pretty much the entire game, and then at some point, Hikaru made a move that was really natural, but it cost him the game. And yeah, that's maybe I'll show the other one, so I'm not gonna spoil all of them. But yeah, here are the standings after this round. So Magnus now leading with 9.5. Second place Fabiano with 8. Hikaru with 6.5 in third place. Arjun 6 points. Fourth place. Fifth place Wei Yi with 5.5, and also shared, or rather shared, fifth and sixth Wei Yi and Gukesh Domaraju. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely played by both of them, but somehow Magnus, emerges victorious. I'm saying, definitely it was due to that mini Magnus effect move where Fabio really could have played bishop captures on e5. He didn't. He played bishop e2, and that was the start of the downfall. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Nidhi Kumar, Robert Arathun, Carlos Salinas, London Initiative for Safe AI, and Ricardo Paulin for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, but mostly covering Norway Chess until it finishes. Now we go into the second half of the tournament. Again, we have the big clash, Magnus versus Gukesh, coming up next. See you soon.